The Objective News Network status report on the Russo-Ukrainian war. Is it worth it? The war between Russia and Ukraine began in February 2014, just over 9 years ago. 2 days ago, Ukrainian President Zelensky just announced that 31,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. Meanwhile, a U.S. intelligence report, declassified in mid December of 2023, estimated that 315,000 Russian troops had been killed or wounded in Ukraine. The Biden administration and U.S. Congress have spent about $75 billion to help Ukraine fight the Russian invasion. The money consists of military, humanitarian, and financial support. But the once overwhelming support for Ukrainian independence from the impressive influence of Vladimir Putin and Russia has waned in the 9 years since the war started, with two clear sides emerging on the issue of continuing aid to Ukraine. On one side are the people who believe that further U.S. aid to Ukraine is simply a bad idea. They point to several factors. First, the opponents to further aid say that a war with Russia is different than past engagements. These opponents say that Americans have come to expect easy victories, but that Russia would be no pushover. They say that Moscow has a full range of nuclear weapons, which it could use to respond to Allied conventional superiority on the battlefield. And last June, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev threatened that Moscow would use nuclear weapons if it was necessary to drive Ukraine into submission. The opponents also contend that the U.S. should not be involved in international charity. They say that while it's impossible to blame Ukraine for wanting the West to protect their country, it makes no sense whatsoever for the Allies to do it. They contend that adding Ukraine to NATO would dramatically degrade U.S. security by turning a conflict that's currently irrelevant to U.S. national security into a major military confrontation between the United States and Russia. Next, they argue that Moscow has much more to lose than the U.S. in Ukraine, and that Ukraine matters more to Putin than to Washington. For this reason, they say Moscow will devote far greater resources and take a far greater risk than the Allies will. Putin has already accepted the loss of hundreds of thousands of troops and other human casualties, financial losses, economic isolation, military embarrassment after military embarrassment, and the political fallout from going to war against Ukraine at home. The opponents say that security guarantees and alliance commitments in the Russo-Ukrainian war could backfire on America. They believe that any presumption on our part that they would somehow deter Russia from taking military action is simply not true, and it certainly has not worked, at least to this point in the 9-year war. These critics go on to remind us that the complex networks of World War I alliances that fueled the fires of war in Europe and extended across the world. Then there are arguments that U.S. foreign policy should be based on the interests of America, not other nations. They say that Ukraine is a European problem and that Ukraine is only geopolitically significant to Europe. Yet NATO members continue to shrink their militaries. They say it is time Europe did some military heavy lifting on their own. For all of these reasons and more, the opponents to further aid to Ukraine say that a negotiated settlement to end the war is the only solution. To quote Doug Bandow, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, quote, only a negotiated settlement, no matter how unsatisfying, offers a possible resolution of the conflict. The alternative may be the collapse of the Ukrainian state and long-term confrontation between the West and Russia, close quote. I quote again, unfortunately, weaker parties also must make accommodations. During the Cold War, Finland maintained its domestic liberties by not antagonizing the Soviet Union. The world is similarly unfair to Ukraine today. Military victory is unlikely. Stalemate threatens Ukraine with economic crisis. The Allies hope that sanctions will force Russia to concede, but Vladimir Putin won't retreat voluntarily. Close quote. On the other side of the argument, the proponents of further aid to Ukraine contend that supporting Ukraine is the right thing to do, and that U.S. support is about more than just Ukraine. It's about maintaining the international order that keeps all countries and all populations safe, including Russia, close quote, says Celeste Wallander, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Wallander believes that Putin is seeking to shred the international order. Putin wants to intimidate and dominate its smaller neighbors, she warns. She also says that Russian actions have implications that extend around the world, saying, quote, it's not just a European security issue, it is a global security issue, she said. And again, I quote Wallander's comments from a DoD news release, quote, built into the fabric of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is the agreement that nuclear powers will respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of other countries and agree to support the peaceful use of nuclear energy for their prosperity. All of that is at stake in Russia's invasion and occupation of Ukraine, she said. The DoD article goes on to say that Chinese leaders are watching the war in Ukraine very closely and have a, quote, huge stake in Russia's success, close quote. And I quote Wallander again, if Putin is successful in shredding the United Nations Charter and benefiting from the use of force in Europe, what's to stop China from following that path when it is ready, she asked. It is what it is. This is John Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network. As always, we look forward to your ideas and comments on this story. What do you think? Should we continue to fund the Ukrainians in their war against Russia? Thanks for watching and hit the subscribe button below. Be sure to tell your friends and colleagues about us, and we will see you the next time.